Okay, awesome. It's about 4 past the hour, so I think we are going to get started. Thanks everyone for joining us today for our Excel for Organizers Part 1 training. My name is Molly Gott, and I am the Director of Trainings at Little Sis, the organization that's putting this on today. And I'm going to be one of our presenters along with my colleague Lauren Parker, who will introduce themselves in a little bit and is really going to be walking us through kind of the meat of today's training. But yeah, this is kind of a training that we have wanted to put on for a while and have heard from organizers that it would be helpful, and we were really excited to see a lot of people signing up for it. So we're excited to dig into some of this today, and hopefully people will come away with some new Excel understanding and skills. A couple of housekeeping things right at the top. So, like I said, Lauren and I will be the ones presenting today. The majority of the training is going to be a screen share where Lauren walks us through some Excel tips and tricks. We decided not to turn on the chat and the Q&A today because we thought we were going to be a pretty big group, which we are, and that it would get a little hectic in there. So we're not going to do Q&A and chat, but we will share at the end how you can get in touch with Lauren and I if you have follow-up questions. And we're recording today's training. We will make sure to send out a link to it afterwards. It will be on YouTube. And then we also have the slides and a link for the slides later on. So don't worry about taking notes or anything like that. All the materials that we share will be ready for you all at the end. So just to start, I think probably some people on here know Little Sis, have been to a Little Sis training before, and others may have not. So I just wanted to kind of introduce who we are real quick. Little Sis is a watchdog research group. We specialize in power research or power mapping, powerful people in organizations in partnership with social movement groups. So really focused on powerful corporations, billionaires, and elected officials, the people and organizations that drive our politics and our economy. We do that research independently. We have a blog called Eyes on the Ties where we publish that research. We do that research in partnership with different grassroots organizing groups. We also do trainings like this one today. We train organizations and the general public, like you all, on the kind of ins and outs of doing power research, with the idea that it strengthens our movements to build up that research capacity and our ability to do power research and make the connections between crises that are happening in our lives, policies that are affecting our lives and communities, and the people that are driving them. Today's training is the first one of our 2026 public training series, which I'll give a little bit more info in a second. And then we also oversee some pieces of tech. So we run a database called littlesis.org. We're called Little Sis because it's like the opposite of Big Brother is Little Sister. It's free, it's open source. We sometimes call it like an involuntary Facebook of the 1%. It tracks relationships between powerful people, corporations, organizations. And along with that tool, we also have something called Holographer that lets you make really nice data visualizations of those connections between powerful people and organizations. So we do a lot of different stuff. We're here to support you all in the work that you are doing around the country. And as I said, one piece of that is public trainings that are free and open to everyone, which is what today's is. It's our first one of the year. I've included here some other upcoming trainings that might be interesting for people to attend. If you're interested in them, you can sign up at littlesis.org/trainings. There'll be registration links there. A couple of ones that I wanted to flag in particular that we have coming up. The next one is an intro to the Little Sis database and Holographer, the mapping tools that I was just talking about. That'll be the first week of March. Part two of this training will be in a month on March 11th. And then we're also leading a training on the 26th around researching ICE contracts, which I know there's a lot of people probably on this call working on. Ice Fight Back right now. I think there's a lot of people signed up for that one. So if any of those are of interest, please make sure to sign up and join us. And we have a calendar up for the whole rest of the year that you can also see at littlesis.org/trainings. A quick note about today's training before we get started. So, like I just mentioned, our Excel for Organizers is a two-part training. So today is part one. It's going to be very basic. We're going to be covering basic functions like formatting, what is an Excel spreadsheet, data types that you can input into Excel, how to use filters, how to sort, and how to do very basic operations. So this is designed for people who really have very, very little Excel knowledge. So if that is you, you're in the right place. If you feel like you kind of already know that, you're obviously welcome to stay on today for the next hour or so. But I'd also encourage you to join for part two, which is going to be a month from today on the 11th of March. And that's where we're going to be doing a little bit more advanced kind of data analysis skills, using formulas, using pivot tables, some more advanced stuff. So today's part one. Next month, we'll do part two, and you can again register at that at littlesis.org/trainings. So since we don't have a Q&A for people or a chat for people today where they can introduce themselves, we just wanted to do a quick poll to get a sense of who is with us today. Um, it's really helpful for us to know so we can keep improving these trainings over time. So I think Allie, my wonderful coworker, is gonna launch the poll, and if people can take a couple seconds and answer those questions. That would be wonderful, and we'll report out on who's here in a second.
I think we're approaching almost everyone taking the poll. A lot of new folks to Little Sis, so welcome. About 86%. This is your first Little Sis Power Research training, so that's awesome. A lot of housing and environmental justice folks, some economic and education justice, migrant and racial justice, pretty evenly spread. And then the about 36% said a three on how familiar they are with Excel. The next largest is two at 30%. So kind of mid-range. But thanks everyone.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. That's great. There's so many new people on. We're glad to have you and hope to see you at trainings in the future. Um, okay, awesome. So a little bit about our agenda today. We're gonna real quick talk about just some kind of common use cases for Excel and organizing. And then for the rest of the hour, I'm gonna hand it over to Lauren, who's gonna share their screen and show us kind of intro to the features of Excel, and a demo on these kind of key things to you know about it. So real quick, I imagine that people who are getting on this kind of have an idea of how they already use Excel or want to use Excel or similar programs um, in your kind of day-to-day work and organizing, but a couple of ways that we kind of heard from people and see in our work, just so people can kind of have this in mind as Lauren's doing their example. Generally kind of break down into like internal data that you're trying to analyze and organize and understand, and then more data analysis. Um, So, for example, for internal data, you might have outreach lists or lists of volunteers or lists of organizing conversations or donor data, a bunch of stuff that's populating a spreadsheet or is not already populating a spreadsheet. And you need to figure out how you can sort it, organize it, glean helpful information, use it to know who you need to follow up with, who's giving you the most money, when they gave you money the last time, when was the last time you had an organizing conversation, things like that. And then the second category, this data analysis, tends to be a little bit more when you're doing the kind of work Little Sis does of power research, researching powerful people, organizations, and have large data sets that you want to analyze and have questions about. So that might be campaign finance data. You know, you have a list of the biggest donors to your local elected official. It's, completely unorganized. You're trying to find, did a particular person give to them? Who gave the most? How do I make a list of the biggest donors and sort by it? All that kind of stuff. Property data set. So I know we had some housing justice researchers on here. Maybe you're looking at a big, data set of addresses for a landlord that you're organizing around, or maybe you're looking at a big data set of tax breaks that the landlord is getting, and want to do some analysis of it. And then also like corporate financials, so doing investigative research about corporations, their revenues, their profits, salaries of executives, sorting through who their biggest investors are, all of these things, where we have a big set of data and want to glean our specific answers to our specific questions. So Lauren's going to talk a little bit more about this, I think, but that's just to kind of have in mind as we're going. And I'm going to hand it over to Lauren to introduce themselves and take us away.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren. I'm a senior researcher with Little Sis. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining today. It's really exciting that 300 people are on this training right now. So we wanted to just acknowledge that I think for a lot of us, spreadsheets and data analysis can feel really daunting. But our hope is with this training that spreadsheets kind of go from something that feels like really unwieldy and hard to decipher to something that maybe you're curious about or that feels a little bit more comfortable and accessible, and that you can take some of the skills that you learn here into your organizing and activist work. We really wanted to provide just like a bite-sized piece of information in this training, so likely we'll end before the top of the hour and you can get some time back in your day. All right, next slide. So how do we use spreadsheets? What are some of the common features? We can create tables to present information. We can do basic operations like I'll show you today to add together numbers, subtraction, etc. We can aggregate, filter, sort your data. We can even do some joining and of multiple data sets together and cleaning and standardizing. So like data analysis. We can look at trends in producing charts, and even in Excel, produce some geographic maps. And for more advanced techniques, you can even build some models and build little apps. But most of what probably you'll encounter is covered by the first couple bullet points. So it's, how do we use spreadsheets to organize data and present information? Next slide. And just a quick note about today, we are begrudgingly using Google Sheets today. We really, I think, tried to think of what's going to be sort of reliable for the purposes of a demo, what maybe a lot of people will encounter. Google Sheets, so we're using it today for those reasons, since we have such a big group here on the training, but really are not endorsing Google. We really encourage everyone here to kind of seek out some alternatives that provide a pretty similar experience. So CryptPad is better, is a great option. Proton Sheets, LibreOffice. Those are going to be, especially if you're concerned about security, Google is not really the option that you want to go for. you might want to consider something like CryptPad. But anything you learn today is going to be fairly similar to what's in some of those other platforms. All right. So let's start a demo. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Is that visible to everyone? Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. All right. So there's a lot here when you first arrive at your first spreadsheet. There's this toolbar with a bunch of symbols on top. We're going to kind of like ignore that for the time being and really look at this first layout area here. We have what we see as a grid. Right below it are tabs. So you can move between different sheets of data by clicking on the different tabs. And the tabs really comprise what is called like a workbook. We have individual spreadsheets, and all the spreadsheets together are in one workbook. So within a given spreadsheet, we have this grid layout area. The grid is comprised of both rows here on the horizontal. You'll see that rows are labeled with numbers. So right now I'm in row 3. This is, for example, row 7. And then we also have columns in the vertical. We have column A, we have column C, column D, for example. At the intersection of each row and column is what's called a cell. And so a cell is like your basic unit of a spreadsheet. It's where you're going to be entering data and editing data. So each cell is kind of named by its corresponding row and column. So if I'm on this cell here, we have column B, row 3. So this would be cell B3. If I'm over here, this would be cell A6. This will definitely come up later, so I'm just introducing this right now. All right. So when you want to enter data into a cell, first you can like click once on a cell to select it. You can click twice to start editing it. And we can enter a lot of different types of data. We'll talk about a little bit more, but so I can enter some text, just say hello. I can enter, for example, a number, an integer, like that. I can use a basic formula to tell the cell to do something. Formulas, you start with the equal sign, and then you can say 1 plus 2, or whatever sort of basic operation you want to do, and press enter. And it works kind of like a calculator. You have that value of 3. Or you can have a cell refer to another cell. Say equals, and I'm going to say the cell above it, which is cell B6. Hit enter. And then you see that it's also the number 3. So looking at this sheet, you see the values. If you want to get a sense for the underlying formulas, you can look at this formula line right on top of the grid. We see that this refers to cell B6. This one has our formula of 1 plus 2, etc., and so on. We can also do some basic formatting, which is always helpful in trying to present data in a way that is accessible, or especially tabular data. We have our toolbar up here. If you want to change the font, you can go to this little drop down, pick a different font. You can change the font size, for example. Great. You can make it bold or italic. You can change the color. So let's do red. You can even add some background fill too, for example. Okay, and there's a lot of other options here, but those are kind of probably the most common formatting options that you'll use. If you want to change the view, the zoom of your screen, you can go here to your zoom. You can zoom in really close. You can back out, and we'll come back to 150. Okay. If you want to, let's say you want to undo an action you just did, you can hit this little undo symbol as well. So it'll take off the last thing that you just did. Deleting data is pretty easy. You can just hit delete. You can also right click and say cut or delete. Great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more in depth about data types. So the types of data that you're going to be inputting or working with in a spreadsheet. So I have a couple different types here. We talked a little bit about text. Text is also referred to as strings. This is, words and characters. And I'm introducing this concept of data types because Excel, Google Sheets, etc., handles data depending on the format that it is. And sometimes you encounter some errors, which we'll talk about a little bit. And it kind of comes down to how the spreadsheet is like reading a certain type of data. So let's kind of go through these different types, and it'll be more important in the part 2 of this training. But okay, so we have what we said, text data, or what's called string data. We have numerical data, so numbers. That could be an integer, or it could be like this number here, a decimal. We also have a different data type that represents currencies, and usually that has a little, currency symbol in front of it. We have dates, which you can format. Here in the US, the common formatting is month, day, year, but you can kind of change the order of that depending on where you are. We have the time data, and we also have percents. There's other data types, but those are the really common ones you're going to be working with. And I mentioned that, the computer will be reading your data thinking it's a certain type. And so sometimes it gives you an error if you try to do something that doesn't really match how it understands the data type. So for example, if we wanted to tell the spreadsheet to do an addition between the word hello and the number 2, it's going to give us an error because it doesn't know how to add a text or a word to a number. And so you get an error like that. Okay. Again, this will become a little bit more important as you kind of progress in your Excel journey, but just wanted to give you a quick introduction there. So let's go to an example of how to work with data in a very simplified sort of context, but one that hopefully will be relevant to you in some of the organizing work that you're doing. Let us pretend that we're trying to organize a bake sale of 10 of our friends. We want to make sure the 10 friends show up with cupcakes and that they don't flake. And we want to know how many they've committed to, and we want to try to figure out if we need to follow up with people. So we've started a spreadsheet here with a table. We've added some information to our rows and our columns. You can see here on the first row is what is called a header row, and this really describes each column. In column A, we have a list of names of our friends. We have in column B the number of cupcakes that they said they'll bring. We also have in column C when we last talked to them. And we have in column D sort of a question about, do we need to follow up with a given person? Below this table, we have some space where we can do some calculations. So what do we want to try to figure out? Maybe the first question is, okay, we need to bring 200 cupcakes to this party. Do we currently have enough? So we have 200 listed here. Let's take a quick sum of the data here to try to understand, is that more or less than 200? So I'll start a formula in this cell, say equals, because we're starting a formula, and then I'll use this function sum to get a total. The sum function asks for the range that you're trying to perform the calculation over. So we'll take our cursor and we'll drag it across this range of data that has our number of cupcakes in it and hit enter. Okay, so it says that we only have 175 cupcakes committed. So how many do we need? Here we can also perform another little calculation. We're going to start our formula with an equal sign, and we're going to subtract 200 from 175. We could input it as 200 minus 175. That would be perfectly fine. Or we could have it reference the cells that have these values. So we could say reference cell B15, which has the value 200 in it, minus the cell B16, which has the value 175, and then hit enter. Okay, so we need 25. Good to know. All right, so maybe the next question is, well, maybe we want to like sort the table to understand who could we ask to bring more. So we want to kind of sort it on who's going to come with the least amount of cupcakes to the most. So what we do is drag our cursor over the range of the table. We're going to go to the data drop-down menu. We're going to go to sort range and not sort sheet, because we don't want the whole worksheet to be sorted. We just want the range. And for this, we're going to go to advanced range sorting options. Molly, I just want to check, is the dialog box visible when I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay, great. So advanced range sorting options, great. And if you can see the dialog box that pops up, you're going to get an option that says data has header row. We do have that. And then we're going to sort by cupcakes, and it's going to be sorting ascending. It says A to Z, but that means ascending, so least amount of cupcakes to the most. And let's hit sort. All right, so you'll see that by sorting, it does rearrange the order of your table. We can see that Alexis, Johnny, Moira, and Roland are all only thinking about bringing 5 cupcakes, but we have Jocelyn and Twyla here that are really going to carry the day and bring about 45. So maybe we can follow up with these 4 people to see if they can kind of cover the remaining 25 cupcakes. Let's also try to figure out now, let's practice some like data entry and filtering skills by trying to answer the question, so who have we not contacted in like the past month? There are folks here that we only talked to in like December and January, so let's find those people and follow up with them. All right, so let's enter in data for this. So Alexis, we talked to her in February, so we do not need to follow up with her. Johnny, January, yes. Let's follow up with him. Same thing, yes. Stevie, we talked to her in February, so we don't need to talk to her again. We do need to follow up with these 2 people. And then Twyla, we talked to her way back in December, so it'd be good to talk to her again. Okay. Let's add a filter to this so we just see those people who we need to follow up with. Again, drag your cursor over the range of the table, go back to the data toolbar and drop down and say create a filter. Now this is not going to delete or change your data. It's just going to change how you view the data. When you add your filter, you'll see some symbols on each of the columns. And then you can tell it which column you want to filter on and by what criterion. So needs a follow-up, I'm going to deselect no and just select yes. Okay, so we have these 7 people we want to follow up with. Great. So that's great. We have here just like a streamlined table of follow-ups that we want to do. And at least 3 of those people are the people that we were going to ask to bring more anyway. So great. If you want to take off your filter, you can just go back to the data toolbar and say remove filter, and then everything comes back. Okay, so that was really just a quick introduction to some operations that you can do. I hope that this, like, even though it was just kind of a cute example, I hope that you can see that it was maybe parts of it were similar to what you might encounter. Like, for example, if you had a table of volunteers, it might look very similar to like who you might need to do follow-up one-on-ones with. Maybe you're part of like a tenant union and you got a list of properties that have the value of each property, and you want to just do a sum over that to see how much what's the total value of properties your landlord owns, for example. Or, Molly talked about this too, like maybe you're part of a legislative campaign and you have a list of donors to a politician and you want to try to sort the table to see the top donors. That would follow, like in each of those examples, you could follow a very similar approach here as we did with this like smaller example. All right, I'm gonna stop there.
Can I ask like two questions, Lauren, that occurred to me as you were going
Yeah.
that I think other people might have? So one, I noticed like when you highlighted a column that had numbers, it was summing it at the bottom. Is that the same thing as doing the operations, or what's the benefit to
Yeah,
doing the
that's a
operations?
good
I guess
idea.
I'm
Here, let
thinking
me.
this was a very small data set, but in other cases, people might have many, many, many rows of data.
Yep, it's
So
always so I think Molly was referring to if you highlight this, the bottom right, Google Sheets at least will give you this value that says sum is 175, which matches like our calculation. And that can be really helpful. Like maybe you don't want to enter into a cell yourself, the calculation, you can just look here. They give you a couple other options for what this can display. So you could say, well, I want it to display an average. You could do that. You could show the minimum value, which in this case is 5. You could show the maximum value, which in this case is 45. The count of the number of numbers here. So we have 10 friends. The one thing I would just kind of warn against is like, for example, if you did this, where you click on the whole column, it's gonna sum any number that is in that column. So for here, you can see that the range for that includes all these other numbers that we put below our table. So I think that's definitely a tip when you're working with spreadsheets, is just be very mindful about what range you're using to perform an operation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Then another question I had that I noticed you were doing it was maybe just around like parentheses in Excel, and what when you use those and what those mean. Like I saw when you were doing the subtraction, you were using parentheses, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's do this sum operation again. The way I did it is I hit equal. That tells the spreadsheet that I'm starting a formula. And then I told it that I want to use a certain function called sum. It brings up by default a list of all the common functions that include the word sum in it. But we just want, and it shows a little description of what each one of those are. So sum is the sum of a series of numbers in our cells. That's great. So we start typing that, and then we have to give it what is the range that we want to perform the operation over. We do that by starting a parentheses and then including the range in that parentheses. So it's guessing that we want to sum this range. It's guessing correctly, but we'll drag it. And then we'll close parentheses to include the range in that function. So we have equal sign, sum, open parentheses, the range of data that we want to produce a total over, and then close parentheses. And yep.
Oh no, go ahead.
If you're confused about like, this is called like the syntax of a function, there's usually some pretty good help pages by just saying like Google Sheets, sum function, and then it'll kind of like walk you through what are the different elements of that function that you need to kind of input.
Cool. And then one other question or maybe thing to point out that I had was around the filtering function. Because I feel like that's one that I use a lot in our work. And just like when you showed it that you could do yes or no, maybe showing people that you can also select like multiple things. Maybe talk about that real quick and how I feel like that's something I
Oh,
use
sure.
That's often helpful. Like you only have
Oh,
two options here, I guess, but if you had more.
okay, cool. So let's, just for the sake of an example, let's say a maybe. Let's put for one person, we're like, we might need to follow up, but we're not totally sure. If you want to add your filter again, you go to data, create filter, and then let's say that I just want to see those people who I might need to follow up with and that I definitely need to follow up with. So I'm going to remove the no and keep the maybe. And so, yeah, so in this case, it has two values that are included, and one value that we excluded.
And you can also in there search for particular words. So if people would imagine, for example, if you had a really, really long spreadsheet with a bunch of different things in that field, you can look for it that way too. Okay, then my last question is um maybe this is obvious, but in thinking about working with spreadsheets, do you have like tips or things that you do visually, like whenever you first get a data set to like make it easier to work with? Does that make sense as
The
a
first
question?
thing that I'll look at is the header row. So ideally, whenever you're working with data, like let's say you copy a table from somewhere else and you paste it into a spreadsheet, hopefully it'll come with the first row describing each column. And that is the first place to look at. Like, what is the data that I'm looking at? And so here, like that it seems pretty clear. Sometimes when you're working with data from administrative sources, or copying it from a report, sometimes it's a little less clear. So definitely look at the header row. The other thing I'll do just for the sake of my eyes is select all the data, put it in the same font, and like make sure the font size is the same size. Because sometimes you'll bring it into a spreadsheet and it's just 10 different fonts and all different sizes, and it's really hard to just like ingest. So I'll do that. Um, and then I think here too, what I've done is I've put little borders around the table to kind of make sure that it seems distinct from the rest of the sheet. So the way I did that was I highlighted that range and I went to this little borders icon and then added all borders. Now, if you want to take them all off, you can do that and say clear borders. I think it's like maybe a little bit easier, at least for me to see, to add all borders. Or maybe you just want to put a top border. You can do that too.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for all the tips. Cool. So, like we said, that's kind of our part one for today. We're gonna wrap up soon. We'll probably be done before the hour. We have another poll for people that Allie's gonna launch here in a sec just to give us some more feedback on the training. So yeah, if people can respond to that real quick, that would be great. It'll take us a couple seconds.
Might give it another 30 seconds or so, I think.
Thanks, Allie.
Bing, so About half of the folks have filled it out.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. Looks like a lot of folks have filled it out at this point, and there's definitely a bump in how familiar folks are feeling with Excel. So, great.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So like I said, the slides for this and a recording are available. If you want to go back and reference it, it'll be on our YouTube channel tomorrow. And there's a QR code here that you can scan for the slides. But also we'll send out an email with a link to the slides as well. And please remember to mark your calendars for our next trainings. Hopefully, a lot of you will join us for Excel for Organizers Part 2, where we'll get into more data analysis. And make sure to sign up for anything else that relates to organizing that you're doing in the upcoming year. And then the last thing is we do these trainings for free. If you feel moved to donate even $5, it really helps us out to be able to keep doing that. And you can do that at littlesis.org/donate. And we appreciate that very much. And then, Lauren and I and the rest of the Little Sis staff are here to support people in all their power researching needs. Here's our email addresses, just our names at littlesis.org. You can follow our Instagram and our Blue Sky, and check out our newsletter at littlesis.org/newsletter to get lots of direct original reporting that we do on billionaires, corporations, and elected officials around the country. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Lauren, for presenting today. Thank you, Allie, for doing tech. And we will hopefully see a bunch of you all in a month at part 2. Thanks.